The rain poured relentlessly, drenching everything in its path. Sophie's worn-out sneakers squelched against the pavement as she trudged through the city streets, clutching a damp folder of her meager belongings, a few certificates, a tattered resume, and a photograph of her late parents. Her heart raced as she approached the sleek glass building that stood like a fortress of opportunity and intimidation. Inside, she could see professionals in sharp suits, laughing, typing, moving with purpose. They seemed a world away from Sophie, whose coat barely kept out the cold and whose stomach hadn't known a proper meal in days. "Today is my chance," she whispered, her voice almost drowned by the storm. This was the last interview she could afford to attend. After weeks of rejection letters, she had nothing left. No money, no hope. But as she stood at the revolving doors, rain dripping from her hair, Sophie's determination flared. Inside, a receptionist eyed her with mild disdain but motioned toward the elevators. Sophie stepped in, her reflection in the mirrored walls a reminder of everything she wasn't. Polished, confident, secure. She clenched her folder tighter. This was her only shot, and failure wasn't an option. Sophie grew up in a small, loving household. Her parents, though poor, always encouraged her to dream big. They taught her the value of hard work, resilience, and kindness. Her father often said, "Sophie, no matter what life throws at you, remember, you can overcome anything, as long as you don't lose hope." But life wasn't kind. When Sophie was 16, a tragic car accident claimed her parents' lives, leaving her alone to fend for herself. With no close relatives and barely any savings, Sophie had to drop out of school to work odd jobs to survive. For years, she scraped by, taking shifts at diners, cleaning houses, and doing whatever she could to keep a roof over her head. Yet, no matter how hard she worked, it seemed like the world was always one step ahead, ready to knock her down. Recently, the diner she worked at closed without warning, leaving her jobless and desperate. She tried applying everywhere, bookstores, retail shops, offices, but no one seemed willing to hire a young woman with no formal education and no connections. Now, at 23, Sophie was running out of options. She had sold most of her belongings just to pay rent, but eviction loomed on the horizon. This interview was her last hope. The company, a prestigious marketing firm, was looking for an administrative assistant. Sophie knew she wasn't the ideal candidate, but she had poured everything into her application, highlighting her work ethic, problem-solving skills, and determination. Her fingers brushed over the photograph of her parents in her folder. "For you," she whispered, as the elevator dinged, signaling her arrival. Sophie stepped into the bustling office where the air buzzed with energy and the faint hum of keyboards. The receptionist directed her to a small waiting area where she sat nervously, her hands clutching the folder like a lifeline. Across from her sat other candidates, polished, confident, dressed in tailored suits that screamed success. Sophie's heart sank as she compared her threadbare coat to their designer attire. Before she could spiral further, a door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, sharp-featured, and radiated authority. His name tag read, Mr. Harris, hiring manager. "Sophie Bennett," he called, glancing at a clipboard. Sophie stood, her legs trembling as she followed him into the interview room. The room was minimalist, yet intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. Mr. Harris motioned for her to sit, his expression unreadable. He skimmed through her resume, his brow furrowing slightly. "You don't have much formal experience," he remarked, his tone neutral. "I don't," Sophie admitted, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But I've worked hard all my life and I'm willing to learn. I'll give everything I have to this job." Mr. Harris leaned back, folding his arms. "Why should we take a chance on you, Ms. Bennett? There are dozens of candidates with degrees and experience." Sophie's throat tightened, but she refused to let her fear show. "Because I know what it means to struggle," she said. "I've faced challenges that have taught me resilience, adaptability, and how to solve problems under pressure. I may not have a degree, but I have determination, and I don't give up." Mr. Harris studied her for a moment, his expression inscrutable. Finally, he set her resume aside and said, "We'll be in touch." As Sophie left the room, she felt her hope slipping away. His response was polite, but she knew what it meant. The following week passed in agonizing silence. Sophie checked her phone obsessively, but no calls or emails came. She tried to prepare herself for rejection, but the thought of returning to her empty apartment with eviction looming was too much to bear. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the rain, her phone buzzed. Her heart leaped as she saw an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice shaky. "Ms. Bennett, this is Mr. Harris," came the familiar voice. Sophie's breath caught. "Yes, sir? We'd like to offer you the position," he said. "Can you start Monday?" Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "Yes, thank you so much. You won't regret this, I promise." When Sophie arrived on her first day, she was determined to prove herself. She worked tirelessly, taking every task seriously and staying late to ensure nothing was left undone. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of belonging. But what Sophie didn't know was that her story had reached far beyond the office walls. One afternoon, Mr. Harris called her into his office. Nervously, Sophie stepped inside, clutching a notebook. "Ms. Bennett," he began, "I want to tell you something." Sophie's heart raced as he continued. "When I reviewed your application, I almost dismissed it. But something about your determination and honesty stuck with me," he admitted. "I was curious, so I looked into your references and your past." Sophie's face turned red, wondering what he had found. "I learned about your parents, about how you've been working to survive since you were a teenager. I learned how you saved up to attend this interview, even though it meant sacrificing so much." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She had never expected her struggles to be acknowledged, let alone understood. "What you've done," Mr. Harris said, his voice softening, "is extraordinary, and I want you to know that this company values people like you, people who fight against the odds and never give up." He reached into his desk drawer and handed her an envelope. "This is an advance on your salary," he said. "Use it to get back on your feet. You've earned it." Sophie stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. She couldn't hold back the tears as gratitude overwhelmed her. The moment Sophie left Mr. Harris's office, she broke down in tears, not tears of despair, but tears of relief and hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. She used the advance to pay her rent and buy groceries. For the first time in weeks, she cooked a warm meal in her tiny apartment, savoring every bite. But more than the money, it was the kindness and acknowledgement that changed Sophie's life. She threw herself into her work, determined to repay the faith Mr. Harris had shown in her. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Within months, Sophie became an integral part of the team. She streamlined processes, built strong relationships with clients, and even organized a charity drive for underprivileged youth, a cause close to her heart. At the company's annual meeting, Mr. Harris stood on stage and called Sophie up. "This young woman," he said, "is proof that talent, resilience, and heart matter more than any resume. Sophie Bennett is not just an employee, she's an inspiration to us all." The room erupted in applause as Sophie stood there, tears streaming down her face. Sophie's life transformed in ways she never imagined. She found stability, purpose, and a sense of belonging. More importantly, she rediscovered her confidence. With her first promotion, Sophie decided to honor her parents' memory by starting a scholarship fund for young adults who, like her, had faced hardship and needed a second chance. Her journey wasn't just about finding a job, it was about finding herself. As she stood in her new office overlooking the city skyline, Sophie held the photograph of her parents. "I did it," she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears, and in her heart she knew they would be proud. If Sophie's story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Echo Tales. Life is full of challenges, but with resilience and kindness, anything is possible. Let us know in the comments what part of Sophie's journey moved you the most. And remember, every act of kindness has the power to change a life. Subscribe now for more stories of hope, redemption, and the incredible strength of the human spirit.